let's use an example of uh, Gilbert Burns' last fight. We saw him go in after a short return. He came back and he fought Bilal Muhammad. And during that fight, he injured his arm. Most people will say it was the way that he shot in and sprawled and hit the mat and it tore his shoulder. And what may be overlooked is the fact that the shoulder was probably weakened from continuous use, being in back to back training camps, back to back fights, and not enough recovery. So his shoulder could have been weakened. We could definitely say that the impact taken in the fight was a factor, but you also have to consider the fact that this is a world champion grappler, very established. I am pretty sure at some point in time he's had someone resist his takedowns or try to take him down in a way that he had to sprawl on the mat or use unorthodox positions that he recovered from pretty quickly. And this happens to all of us in the gym. Sometimes we will suffer an injury and not understand exactly where that injury came from. And the problem is when that injury plays out in the fight. And what do? This is when we start talking about adapting our talents, adapting our skills, going into fight IQ. You have to understand the nature of being hurt. Hurt is a result of something happening to you, whether you fall down or whether someone's kicking you. The more times it happens, the more likely you are to be damaged. And usually that first level of damage is surface level. And you can always tell, number one, because you're constantly being hit in that area. Number two, it's usually surface level. There's some type of redness, some type of bruising, swelling, cuts, abrasions. These are all surface level. The reason we say that this is surface is because you can still defend yourself. You can still move. You can still cover. You can still counter. These things haven't yet progressed to the point that they are interfering with your ability to fight. Next, we go into injury. This is when it gets a little tricky. An injury is when the muscles are somewhat deformed. It's when the bones start to break or protrude or become fractured. The muscles can be sprained or strained or twisted. That's when we're starting to impact our form of defense, where we can't really move as effectively. We can still move, but not as effectively. We can't block or cover effectively, and our ability to counter has been impaired as well. The last phase is when we get into utility, impairment of utility. In other words, we can't use it. We can't use that tool, that weapon anymore, that limb. There's two reasons. Physically, the nerves are destroyed. There's a disconnect between the body part and the brain. The brain's trying to tell it to move, it won't move. And we see this when fighters accept too many calf kicks and they just cannot control the movement of their leg, and they try to put their weight down and their body does not sense balance, and they get the chicken leg dance, the stinky leg dance, and they fall. Just cannot control that. Once it's out of your control and you've lost utility, you've lost the fight. Pretty much, you've lost the fight. The other side of the physical utility is the mental utility. It's when someone does something to you over and over and over, and you simply cannot respond, even if to some degree you have some physical presence left. It's just something's happened to you mentally. Just imagine if you throw a punch at me and I duck it, and every time I duck that punch, I hit you to the body, and you don't particularly like body punches. After a while, you're going to stop throwing that punch at me, and I'm going to control you mentally. So utility can be controlled through mental aspect as well as a physical. The mental aspect means that there's some work on the attacker's part. He has to work for it to get the person to cooperate with their tactics. So it's very important that when we go into the gym, that we also study how injuries work. We don't always want to just say this is what we want to do in a fight. Let's learn to prepare for things that may happen to us, things that we really don't want to happen to us, but they might. And this is why it takes a strong inventory of your opponent's skills and abilities in comparison to yours. You have to understand, especially coaches, you have to understand your trainees' psychological profile in terms of what he think he can do, what he can and can't take. For instance, if you have a fighter who doesn't check kicks, I guarantee you it's along the lines of somewhere that he kicks harder than his opponent. How do you measure that? Or that he can take his kick. How do you measure that? You really can't. So you need to take an inventory of these the psychological profiles as well as the physical capabilities and start planning and training your trainee around these occurrences. As far as how many kicks he throws and punches he throws, it's irrelevant if you don't train specific to the elements of the fight coming up. If you have an opponent, let's look at like certain opponents, and we say, and I can't give you a good example, but I can definitely throw Mayweather in there, that he doesn't throw a lot, and that when he fights guys who do throw a lot, Mayweather has a way of making them throw less. They throw a lot. They throw a lot of wasted punches, and he throws more accurately. Let's put it that way. So if you're going to fight an opponent based on the fact that he throws a lot, or let's say it's your trainee and he believes that he has the world's greatest volume, that his output is amazing, his cardio is unstoppable, and he's fighting an opponent that has found a way in his training and his fighting ability to slow his opponents down. I think that having your trainee throw more and more and more and more and more, doing more, is a mistake. He's going to have to learn to shut down his opponent's offense and expose his defense even more. So just throwing a whole bunch of punches and kicks and knees and elbows won't necessarily do that. But thinking about how you hurt someone, going into that damage phase, where can we mentally destroy his utility? Where can we build up points, hitting that surface area over and over until the leg is actually damaged to the point where he can't move as fast as he used to, or he can't put his weight on his leg? Where can we do that? One of the things I see a lot is when fighters avoid the basics and they tend to do more flashier moves. Those flashier moves are one-offs. They don't happen as often. So going through this phase of damaging your opponent doesn't happen, and that's why your opponent is still in the fight. It's because the things that are the easiest to do, that give you the greatest benefit, you've avoided doing. So pay attention to things like that in the gym. Equate all of this to the opponent that you're fighting, and then figure out how to develop a training program around that to make sure that your trainee is laying hands on his opponent more often and doing damage. I am Coach Sess, and you've had words with the Mad Coach.